Welcome to our discussion concerning Chapter 20, Macroeconomic Policy Around the World. So this is our last week for videos that are for full credit. For next week, we will have a video that you can watch, and that will be an extra credit week. So in this chapter, the beginning of the chapter sort of goes into a little bit of detail acknowledging that GDP, or gross domestic product per capita or per person for a country, is a rough measure that is used to compare one country to another. We'll compare the GDP of one country, the GDP per capita of one country to another, and therefore make some assessments about the standard of living, or whether the country is growing. We can look at that GDP rate changing over time. Now, it's obviously a rough measurement. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the details to see whether countries truly are growing and providing a higher standard of living for their populations, and how they're doing that through technology or different governmental policies concerning fiscal or monetary policy that can reduce unemployment, reduce inflation, create a sustainable balance of trade. So the first thing we're going to look at is let's look at how different economies right now, based on whether they're high, middle, or low income countries, let's see what are some of the things they should be focusing on in order to increase the standard of living in their country. So for a high income country like the United States, they will want to focus on growth policies for technology leader countries. So the goal for a technology leader country would be to shift the aggregate supply curve to the right. We know this because we realize by looking at both the Keynesian and the neoclassical versions of the aggregate supply curve that aggregate supply in the short run can shift around, and we can have changes in prices and real output. However, aggregate supply in the long run is vertical, and therefore the goal is to increase the aggregate supply curve to be able to more efficiently produce goods and services at therefore a lower cost of production with less time and energy and resources in order to make more goods and services for all people. So for high income countries that are technology leaders, they will want to orient their policies for growth in technology. They already have a stable and market-oriented climate, so they'll use effective monetary policy to maintain low rates of inflation. We'll see this happen in those countries. Specifically in the aftermath of the 2007 to 2009 recession, along with all of the policies that were adopted to fight that recession, we had expansionary fiscal and monetary policy in those years. We will always want to maintain low inflation and not neglect the foundation for future long-term growth, which is to adopt policies. The government should adopt policies that would make it easy for firms to generate and apply new technologies. So whether the government is itself investing in currently not feasible technology, such as R&D that isn't profitable right now, all kinds of technologies that come out of learning institutions such as universities. Many of these different technologies and ideas are being paid for by the federal government through grants and contracts, but they're not currently profitable from a business perspective, but they are important in maybe having business applications. So the government might be wanting to make sure that they are funding those types of ideas, idea thinkers, getting people interested in finding new technologies that then business can adopt into their production processes to increase efficiency and shift the aggregate supply curve to the right. They could also directly support businesses, so they could subsidize different types of industries where they think that there is viable technology which could be profitable in the long run, but right now might not be very profitable. So that would be something that the government could also do. Electric cars is a good example of that. Electric vehicle technologies are heavily subsidized by the government, and this is occurring because the government feels that increasing these technologies allows the United States to maintain its position in the world as a technology leader. And when they create new technologies that allow us to do things cheaply, or more cheaply and efficiently, then that should shift our aggregate supply curve to the right. For converging economies, they will want to have different government policies. So China, India, some areas of East Asia and the Pacific, Latin America, Caribbean, and Eastern Europe, these would be economies that are somewhere in between low income and high income countries. What they generally do is they take existing technology that's coming from the technology leader country, and they're applying those technologies in their own countries, and this allows them to experience very high growth rates. So what they need to do, and what they have done, is they have been investing heavily in human and physical capital. This occurs because they have very high savings rates that are much higher than in the technology leader or high income countries. This allows them to make large investments in human and physical capital. They've also opened their markets to the rest of the world for trade and investment. So they're trading, they're exporting, and they're importing, and they're also allowing for foreign investment to occur in their country. The government has been subsidizing specific industries, much in the same way that the government sometimes subsidizes technology industries in the United States. So they will subsidize industries in where they see the potential for growth. That growth should allow for more individuals to be employed in their countries. What they should focus on is improving their educational systems. Once they have more superior educational system, they will be able to move into being technology leaders and create the new technologies that can be applied to businesses. And our last group is really the low income parts of the world. For the most part, these are technologically disconnected countries or continents. For the most part, Africa is a technologically disconnected low income country. There are rural parts of Central and South America that also fall into this camp, and also parts of Asia. In those countries, you see poverty and human deprivation. There are basic needs are not being met, especially in food security, health services, and education. Those countries might also not have economic and legal stability that would allow their economies to grow through the banking and financial intermediaries that they do already have, or that would grow around a more stable economic and legal situation. Another issue they might have is transportation and communication may not be very um, robust. So their transportation, as far as roads are concerned, quick and easy access into different parts of the country might be pretty limited, as well as communication. Not all individuals may have access to phones or computers, and that communication limitation would make it so that it is very difficult to run businesses for the individuals who would want to run businesses. So they really require the full suite of government assistance. They need their healthcare systems to be improved. They need education to be improved. They need communication infrastructure and transportation infrastructure to be greatly increased. And they do still need to acquire physical capital and the technologies that are coming from the growth, the technology leader countries. They also need that technology to increase any ability to use physical or human capital to produce different goods and services. When we're looking at unemployment between high and low income countries, there are different sources of unemployment. So we've sort of talked a little bit about where are the high, middle, and low income countries. What sort of government policies do they need in place to be successful? And in all of those countries, they also need relatively low unemployment to have a high standard of living. So in the United States, we see, or in other high-income countries like Europe, the whole of Europe are high-income countries. We'll have cyclical unemployment that's caused by a recession, and then also our natural rate of unemployment, which are just factors in the labor markets like government regulations about conditions of hiring and starting businesses, which might have discouraged employment. So we'll have our natural rate of unemployment plus our cyclical unemployment, which would give us our total unemployment. And what we see is that fiscal and monetary policy in these high income countries are used in a recession to reduce cyclical unemployment. But it's important to note that monetary and fiscal policy, expansionary monetary and fiscal policy, will not automatically cause the recession to go away. Something else to think about is that there are government laws and regulations. We always know that regulation will decrease aggregate supply, and when this decreases aggregate supply, it reduces real GDP and increases the price level. So if there are excessive government regulations over the labor force, this might cause businesses not to hire. For example, there could be excessively generous benefits, and that might make it difficult for businesses to hire because the cost per worker is greater were those regulations not in existence. So there needs to be a balance between what type of benefits that individuals do deserve and the level of benefits that will achieve adequate levels of low natural lower than natural rate of unemployment. The example that was given in your text was to look at the difference between unemployment in the United States and Europe. Europe has a much more tightly regulated labor market. The benefits are much greater than they are in the United States, and so the trade-off there is that the natural rate of unemployment in Europe is higher than it is in the United States. Unemployment is a little bit different in low and middle income countries. Something we need to take into consideration is that many individuals in low and middle income countries actually barter and trade for their living. So they may not be employed in the traditional sense, that they do not hold a wage earning job, but we still don't want to call them unemployed because they are working every day and bartering and trading for the goods and services that they need. However, something that they're losing out on is specialization. So in high income countries, we are highly specialized. We tend to work in a very, very small corner of the world. For example, I teach economics. That is a pretty specialized skill. Someone else might work in an insurance company and they might help deal with going on site to see what kind of damage occurred in a collision. That is a highly specialized skill. And so the more specialization there is, we know that that actually will increase the amount of production that occurs because specialization increases output. So specialization of labor might benefit these economies, and right now they are not actually accessing specialization of labor. The other thing that's not happening for those who are in a lower middle income country and they're bartering and trading for much of their living is that they're not receiving benefits in the traditional sense either. So here in the United States, we work and we're at least paying into Social Security and receiving Social Security benefits. We might be paying into a retirement plan in which there's some matching benefit coming from our employer. And then when we retire, we have access to these funds to live and buy the goods and services we need in retirement. Now, these individuals do not have access to that. And so not having benefits is also something that they could benefit from if they were holding more traditional wage earning jobs. We also see differences in inflation policies among low income countries versus high income countries. In high income countries, we see that inflation is generally low. High income countries are using monetary policy to accommodate for increases in aggregate demand in excess of the available production of goods and services. And therefore, they use that monetary policy to moderate the long-term inflation. And we will generally consider inflation less than 5% on an annual basis to be considered low. When inflation is much higher, it makes it very difficult for businesses and individuals to plan. For example, if inflation was 100% per year, it would be really challenging to know how much you are going to have to budget for your living expenses for the next few months, because you just don't know by how much all of those goods and services are going to increase in price. And the same goes for businesses. And obviously businesses are very concerned about costs because their revenues minus their costs will lead to their profits. So they need to be able to know what the costs of the intermediary goods and services are in the production of final goods and services. So in the middle to low income countries, what we see happening is that there might be a lot of expansionary fiscal policies being used in their economy. And we know that expansionary fiscal policies will shift our aggregate demand curve to the right. However, if our aggregate demand curve is shifted to the right to the point where we are operating in the vertical section of aggregate supply, expansionary fiscal policy is at that point only going to increase price. And what we find is that when this happens in the United States or in high income countries, monetary policy is used to pull back some of that aggregate demand, pull it down and bring the price level down and lower inflation. But central banks in low and middle income countries tend not to intervene to reduce demand and inflation. So that can be a problem for them. But there are some countries in sort of the low and middle income range that have been able to have strong economic growth despite high inflation. One way they're able to do this is that they index their contracts, wage levels, and interest rates to inflation to accommodate for high levels of inflation. And this therefore allows businesses and individuals to be comfortable with the amount of inflation that they're experiencing in their economy, because they know when that inflation happens, they might not know exactly how much inflation there will be, but they know that their wage or salary will increase adequately enough so that they can be profitable or buy the goods and services that they need to as a household. And lastly, the balance of trade is something to think about. And this discussion is a little bit less low income and high income, and just a couple of concerns over balance of trade. So our balance of trade is looking at our exports minus our imports, and then taking into account the inflow and outflow of financial capital. So all generally all countries know that reducing barriers to trade is potentially beneficial to an economy, but there might be some concerns. The primary concerns over trading goods and services are things like, well, if we allow for foreign competition with textiles, we're going to lose our domestic textile industry. So that would produce a loss of jobs in the United States, for example, and that did happen. We have fear of domestic job loss. We have potential environmental dangers. Are we trading with a country that is destroying the environment when they produce the goods and services they produce? Are we trading with a country who does not have fair labor practices, such as any sort of benefits for their workers or living wages? And someone from our country or a high-income country might be concerned about that when they're importing foreign goods or services. Another idea that was brought up is it necessary to protect things? So is protectionism important for perhaps infant industries? Do we want to allow young industries in our economy to grow and be competitive with foreign competition? And do we need to sort of support that with subsidization or import tariffs to make it more difficult for those other competing industries outside of the country to compete with our infant industries that are growing? So there are many, many concerns in the area of goods and services. Additionally, there might be concerns regarding the balance of trade with flows of financial capital. So we know that a large current account deficit is what we currently have in the US. So we're not offering financial investment abroad at this point. The US economy is actually soaking up financial investment from all over the world. So some people are concerned that this could reverse itself pretty rapidly and lead to a depreciation of our dollar and potential inflation. In small developing countries, so more of the low income countries, there is a similar concern that investors could be fickle and remove their foreign capital investments that they've made. This would cause rapid outflows of the capital that was invested by foreign countries and also potentially depreciate their currencies. So there are certainly some major issues to be concerned about regarding international flows of capital. So this would be our last week for normal credit for the text. Next week we have extra credit chapters that you can take a look at. But please let me know if you have any questions about the material as you read through the text. I am happy to help you and work with you to understand these concepts and use this video to answer the discussion forum post. And I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thanks, guys. Bye.